Close your eyes. Let the darkness settle around you like a heavy blanket. Let your breathing slow, steady, deep. I'm going to tell you a story. A story you think you know. A story about a princess and a spinning wheel and a curse. A story about true love's kiss breaking an enchantment and everyone living happily ever after. You know this one, don't you? You've known it since you were small. The evil fairy who wasn't invited to the christening. The curse of death softened to sleep. The 100 years of slumber. The prince who fights through thorns to reach the sleeping princess. The kiss that wakes her. The wedding. The end. It's a beautiful story. A safe story. The kind that promises children that evil can be defeated. That patience is rewarded. That love conquers all. It's the story we tell at bedtime. With soft voices and happy endings. But you're not a child anymore, are you? And the real story, the old story, the one they told before we decided to protect children from the truth, that story is different. That story has no kiss. It has no gallant prince fighting dragons. It has something far darker, far more disturbing, something that will crawl into your thoughts and make you question everything you thought you knew about fairy tales. So let me tell you that story instead. The real one. The one that survived in whispers and warnings. The one that Charles Perrault tried to soften in 1697. The one that the Brothers Grimm sanitized even further. The one that Disney turned into something pretty and harmless. Let me tell you about Talia, the princess who didn't wake to a kiss but to something unspeakable. Are you ready? Then settle in. Pull the blankets close. Because the story begins not with magic but with prophecy. And it ends not with a wedding but with fire and screams and justice that tastes like ash. The girl's name was Talia, and she was born to a great lord in a time when prophecy was taken seriously, when wise men could read futures in stars and cards and dreams. Her father loved her desperately, his only child, the light of his life, the heir to his fortune and name. When Talia was born, her father did what powerful men did in those days. He consulted the wise men, the fortune-tellers, the seers. He wanted to know his daughter's future, wanted to know what fate had planned for her. He gathered the greatest prophets in the land, offered them gold and gifts, and asked them one simple question. What does destiny hold for my daughter? The wise men consulted their arts. They read the stars, cast the bones, studied the lines on the infant's tiny palms, and slowly, one by one, their faces grew dark. They whispered among themselves, argued in low voices, checked their readings again and again, hoping they were wrong. Finally, the eldest spoke. "My lord," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "your daughter's fate is written in the stars, and it cannot be changed. She will be killed by a splinter of flax. A splinter of flax will pierce her skin, and she will fall down dead." The father's blood ran cold. Flax? The plant used to make linen? The most common fabric in the kingdom? How could he protect his daughter from something so ordinary, so everywhere? But he was a powerful man, a determined man, and he refused to accept this fate. If flax would kill his daughter, then there would be no flax in his domain. He issued a decree immediately. All flax, all linen, every spinning wheel, every distaff, every fiber of the cursed plant was to be removed from his lands. Burned, destroyed, made to disappear as if it had never existed. The decree was enforced with iron will. Servants searched every corner of the estate. Every piece of linen clothing was replaced with silk and wool. Every spinning wheel was taken to a great fire and burned. The smell of burning wood and fiber filled the air for days. The Lord stood and watched it all, his infant daughter in his arms, and believed he had won. He had defeated fate itself. Talia grew up in a palace without flax, without linen, without spinning wheels. She grew into a beautiful young woman, intelligent and kind, beloved by all who knew her. Her father watched her constantly, obsessively, seeing danger in every shadow. But years passed, and nothing happened. No splinter, no death, no fulfillment of the terrible prophecy. Perhaps the wise men had been wrong, people began to whisper. Perhaps fate could be changed after all. The Lord began to relax, to believe that his precautions had worked, that his daughter was safe. Talia was 16 years old when it happened. She was walking through the palace gardens, attended by her maids, enjoying the spring sunshine. The gardens were beautiful, carefully maintained, a place of peace and beauty. She had walked these paths 1,000 times. There was no danger here, but near the garden wall, partially hidden by climbing roses, was a small cottage that had once housed a gardener. It had been empty for years and used, forgotten. The door stood slightly ajar, and Talia, curious as young women are, decided to look inside. Her maids tried to stop her. "My lady, it's just an old storage shed. There's nothing interesting inside." But Talia was already pushing the door open, already stepping into the dusty interior. The cottage was dim, sunlight filtering through cracks in the walls. It smelled of age and neglect. And there, in the corner, covered in cobwebs and dust, forgotten by the servants who had carried out her father's decree all those years ago, was a spinning wheel. Talia had never seen one before. In her entire life, she had never been allowed near flax or linen or the tools used to work them. She approached it slowly, fascinated. "What is this?" she asked her maids. The maids went pale. "My lady, step back. Please, we should leave." But Talia was already reaching out, already touching the ancient wood. The wheel was beautiful in its way, a piece of craftsmanship from another time. And there, still attached to the spindle, was a single piece of dried flax fiber, sharp and brittle with age. Talia touched it gently, curious. The fiber broke, and a splinter, thin as a hair, sharp as a needle, pierced her finger. It was the smallest wound imaginable. A tiny prick, barely bleeding. But the wise men had spoken true. Talia gasped, looked at her finger in confusion, and then her eyes rolled back in her head. She collapsed to the dusty floor like a puppet with cut strings, and she did not wake. The maids screamed. They ran for help. Within minutes, the father was there, falling to his knees beside his daughter's body, calling her name, shaking her shoulders, begging her to wake. Physicians were summoned. They examined her thoroughly. She was breathing, her heart was beating, but she would not wake. Her eyes were closed, her body limp. She was alive but not alive, sleeping a sleep so deep it was almost death. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not quite as predicted. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't alive either. She was trapped somewhere between, unreachable, lost. The father's grief was total and absolute. He had tried so hard to protect her, had done everything in his power, and fate had found her anyway. He couldn't bear it. He couldn't bear to bury his daughter when she still breathed. But he couldn't bear to watch her lying there, day after day, never waking, slowly wasting away. So he made a decision. He would preserve her exactly as she was. He had servants carry Talia to the most beautiful room in the palace, a room with windows that faced the sunrise. They dressed her in her finest gown, arranged her on a bed of velvet, folded her hands across her chest. They made her look like she was simply sleeping peacefully, waiting for morning. Then the father did something strange. He dismissed all the servants from the palace. Every single one. He paid them handsomely and sent them away. Then he himself left, abandoning his home, unable to live in a place that held his sleeping daughter. He locked the palace gates behind him, and he never returned. The palace stood empty for years. The gardens grew wild. The gates rusted shut. Vines climbed the walls. People avoided it, whispered that it was cursed, haunted. The story of the sleeping princess became a legend, then a myth, then something parents told children to scare them into obedience. And inside, in that beautiful room Talia slept on, dust gathered on the furniture. Spiders spun webs in the corners. Seasons changed outside the windows. But Talia, preserved by whatever magic had been in that splinter, did not age, did not decay. She simply slept year after year, alone in the abandoned palace. Until one day, a king came hunting in the forest nearby. His name was Stefan, and he was already married, already had children. He was not a young prince seeking adventure, but a middle-aged man seeking sport. His falcon flew away during the hunt, chasing prey through the trees. Stefan followed, leaving his hunting party behind, riding deeper into the forest than he had intended. The falcon led him to the abandoned palace. It perched on the gate, waiting, as if it had been guiding him here all along. Stefan looked up at the crumbling building, overgrown with vines, and felt a strange pull. Something inside him said, "Enter." The gates were rusted but not locked. They opened with a shriek of protesting metal. Stefan dismounted and walked through the overgrown gardens, up the vine-covered steps, through the open door. The palace was dark and silent, filled with the smell of dust and age and secrets. He wandered through empty rooms, fascinated by this place frozen in time. And then he found the stairs that led up to the tower room. He climbed them slowly, feeling like he was in a dream, and opened the door. There she was, Talia, still lying on her bed of velvet, still dressed in her finest gown, still beautiful after all these years, still sleeping. Stefan stood in the doorway and stared. He had never seen anyone so lovely. Even in sleep, even covered in a fine layer of dust, she was breathtaking. He approached the bed slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. He reached out and touched her hand. It was warm. She was alive. And here, dear listener, is where the story you know would have the prince kiss the princess. Where true love's kiss would break the spell. Where she would wake, they would fall in love, and everyone would live happily ever after. But that's not what happened. Because this king was not a prince from a fairy tale. He was a man, a married man, who had stumbled upon a beautiful unconscious woman in an abandoned palace where no one would hear, no one would know, no one would stop him. He looked at Talia sleeping on her bed, helpless, vulnerable, completely at his mercy. And he made a choice. What happened next is unspeakable. The old versions of this story state it plainly, without apology. The king gathered the first fruits of love while Talia slept. He raped her. There is no other word for it, no gentle way to say it. She was unconscious, unable to consent, unable to resist, unable to even know what was happening to her. When he was done, he left. He rode away, returned to his hunting party, went back to his palace, to his wife, to his children, to his normal life. He thought about the sleeping girl sometimes, with a mixture of guilt and pleasure, but he didn't return. He had taken what he wanted. That was enough. And Talia slept on, alone in the abandoned palace, with no memory of what had been done to her, no awareness of the violation. She simply continued her endless sleep, trapped in whatever dream or darkness held her. Months passed. Inside Talia's sleeping body, something was growing. The king's violation had consequences. She was pregnant, though she didn't know it, couldn't know it. Her body continued its biological functions even as her mind remained trapped in sleep. 9 months after the king's visit, still sleeping, still unconscious, Talia went into labor. Alone in that dusty palace with no midwife, no help, no awareness of what was happening, her body did what bodies do. She gave birth, not to one child but to twins, a boy and a girl. The babies were born healthy, crying, hungry, and their mother slept on, unable to feed them, unable to care for them, unable to even know they existed. The old stories say that fairies came to care for the children, that magic sustained them. But let's be honest about what probably happened. The babies, desperate for food, did what babies do. They sought their mother's breast. They found it, and they began to nurse. Days passed. The twins nursed, and Talia's body responded as nursing mothers' bodies do, producing milk, sustaining the children. But still she did not wake. Then one day, one of the babies, seeking the breast, found Talia's hand instead. The tiny mouth closed around her finger, the finger that had been pierced by the splinter all those years ago. The baby began to suck the way babies do when seeking comfort. And the suction drew out the splinter. The tiny piece of flax that had been embedded in her finger for years, that had kept her trapped in sleep, was pulled free. Talia woke. Imagine it. Imagine falling asleep as a 16-year-old girl in a dusty cottage, and waking up months or years later, in your bed, your body changed, 2 infants nursing at your breast. No memory of how you got here. No understanding of what happened. No explanation. Talia's scream could have shattered the windows. She stared at the babies in absolute terror and confusion. Where had they come from? How long had she been asleep? What had happened to her? She looked down at her body, saw that it had changed, saw the signs of recent childbirth. She touched the babies, felt them warm and alive and somehow hers. And slowly, with growing horror, she began to understand. Someone had come. Someone had found her sleeping. Someone had done something unspeakable. She had been violated in her sleep, had been pregnant in her sleep, had given birth in her sleep. She had missed everything. Her body had been used, changed, transformed, and she had been absent for all of it. The realization was devastating. But the babies were here, real, hungry, innocent. They were not to blame for how they came to be. So Talia, alone in the abandoned palace, did what she had to do. She cared for them. She named them Sun and Moon, after the light that came through her windows. She fed them and held them and tried not to think about the violation that had created them. Weeks passed. Talia survived by finding food stored in the palace kitchens, preserved by the same magic that had preserved her. She cared for her children in complete isolation, in the prison of the abandoned palace, slowly coming to terms with what had been done to her. And then one day the king returned. Stefan had thought about Talia often in the months since his visit. He felt guilty, yes, but also curious. Was she still there? Still sleeping? He decided to go back to see, to perhaps... Well, he didn't examine his motives too closely. He rode to the palace, walked through the overgrown gardens, climbed the stairs to the tower room, and opened the door expecting to find Talia still sleeping on her bed. Instead, he found her awake, standing by the window, 2 infants in her arms. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Stefan's face went white as understanding dawned. Talia's face was a mask of cold fury. "You," she said, her voice shaking. "It was you." Stefan had many options in that moment. He could have apologized, could have offered restitution, could have fled in shame. Instead, he fell to his knees and began to weep. He told her everything. How he had found her, how he had been overcome with her beauty, how he had done something unforgivable. He begged for her forgiveness, promised he would make it right, swore he would provide for her and the children. And here's where the old story takes another dark turn. Because Talia, after her initial fury, after her grief and violation, looked at this king who had raped her, who had stolen her agency, who had changed her life forever without her consent, and she made a choice that modern readers find incomprehensible. She forgave him. She let him stay. She let him visit regularly. She fell in love with him. Why? How? The story doesn't explain. Perhaps it was survival instinct. She was alone, trapped in an abandoned palace with 2 infants. He was a king with resources. Perhaps it was the limited options available to women in that era. Perhaps it was something else, something we can't understand from our modern perspective. Stefan became a regular visitor to the secret palace. He brought food, supplies, gifts. He played with the children, Sun and Moon. He courted Talia with words of love. And somehow, impossibly, she softened toward him. She began to look forward to his visits. She began to believe his promises that he would marry her, make her his queen, legitimize their children. There was just one problem. Stefan already had a wife. The queen's name was never recorded in the old stories. She was simply the wife, the queen, an obstacle to the new romance. But she was a woman too, a woman who had married this king, borne his legitimate children, managed his household for years. And she was beginning to suspect something was wrong. Stefan had become distant, distracted. He disappeared for days at a time with vague excuses. He muttered names in his sleep. Sun, Moon, Talia. The queen, no fool, began to investigate. She had the king followed. She learned about the abandoned palace in the forest. She learned about the beautiful woman living there with twin babies who looked remarkably like her husband. And she understood everything. The rage that filled the queen was absolute. This wasn't jealousy. This was the fury of a woman whose entire life had been built on a lie, whose husband had betrayed her, who was being replaced by some sleeping beauty he'd found in the woods. But the queen was clever. She didn't confront Stefan. She didn't rage or scream. She made a plan. One day when Stefan was away on official business, the queen sent her most trusted servants to the palace in the forest. They carried a message supposedly from the king. Talia and the children were to come to the palace. Stefan wanted them there. He was ready to announce them publicly, to make Talia his acknowledged consort. Talia, trusting, hopeful, believing the lie, gathered sun and moon and followed the servants to the royal palace. She was brought not to the public halls but to the kitchens. The queen was waiting there, and her smile was the smile of a wolf. "Welcome," she said, "to my home." Talia realized too late that she had been tricked. She looked around frantically for an escape, clutching her children close. The queen gestured to her servants, strong men who advanced slowly, blocking the exits. "Your children," the queen said softly, "are very beautiful. Such a shame." She gestured again. The servants tore sun and moon from Talia's arms. Talia screamed, fought, but she was one woman against many. The children were carried away, their cries echoing through the stone halls. The queen turned to her cook, a large man with dead eyes and hands used to butchering meat. "Take the children," she said. "Kill them, butcher them, prepare them as you would any fine meat. Tonight the king will dine on his bastards, and he will never know." The cook, horrified but obedient, took the crying children away. Talia was dragged to a cell and locked inside. She collapsed on the floor, her screams of anguish echoing off stone walls. Her children, her babies, were going to be killed, cooked, fed to their own father. The horror was beyond comprehension. Hours passed. Night fell. In the cell, Talia wept until she had no tears left. She prayed to any god that would listen, begged for mercy, for intervention, for something, anything to save her children. In the kitchen, the cook stood over sun and moon, knife in hand. He looked at the babies, innocent, crying, helpless. He thought of his own children at home, and he made a choice. He couldn't kill them. He wouldn't. Instead, he took the children to his wife, told her to hide them, to keep them safe and secret. Then he returned to the kitchen and butchered 2 young goats instead. He prepared them with all his skill, making them tender and flavorful. He served them to the king that night as requested. Stefan, unaware, ate the meal his wife served him. She watched him closely, waiting for the moment to reveal what he was eating, to destroy him with the knowledge. But she wanted to savor it, wanted to draw out his agony. "How is the meal, husband?" she asked sweetly. "Delicious," he replied. "Your cook has outdone himself. The meat is particularly tender, don't you think?" "Yes, very tender." "Do you know what you're eating?" Stefan looked up, confused by the strange question. "It's goat, isn't it?" The queen's smile was terrible. "No, husband. It's not goat. It's your bastards. Your children by that whore in the forest. Sun and moon prepared especially for you. You're eating your own children." Stefan went white. He stood up so fast his chair crashed over. He looked at the plate, at the half-eaten meat, and he began to vomit. The queen laughed, a sound of pure triumphant malice. "That's not all, husband. Tomorrow I'm going to burn her. Your precious sleeping beauty. I'm going to tie her to a stake in the courtyard and burn her alive, and you're going to watch." Stefan, devastated, broken, could barely speak. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because she took what was mine," the queen hissed. "Because you betrayed me. Because I will not be replaced by some unconscious girl you found in the woods. This is justice." She called for her guards. "Bring the whore from the cells. Prepare the stake. Tomorrow at dawn we burn her." Talia was dragged from her cell. She was beyond fear now, beyond tears. Her children were dead, eaten. She had nothing left to lose. Let them burn her. Let it end. But as she was being led through the palace, she saw something. The cook, standing in a doorway, and in his arms, 2 small bundles. 2 babies, alive, looking at her with wide eyes. Sun and moon. Her children. They were alive. The cook met her eyes and shook his head slightly. "Say nothing." The message was clear. He had saved them. But if the queen knew, she would simply kill them again, more carefully this time. Talia was led to the courtyard. A stake had been erected in the center. Wood was piled around it. The entire court was assembled to watch. The queen stood on a balcony, triumphant. Stefan stood beside her, gray-faced, broken, barely able to stand. Talia was tied to the stake. The queen called down to her mockingly. "Any last words, whore?" Talia looked up at her, and for the first time since being captured, she smiled. "Yes," she said. "Just one question. How does it feel to be married to a rapist?" The court went silent. Stefan's face drained of what little color remained. The queen's triumph faltered. "What? I was asleep," Talia said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "I was unconscious, under a spell. I couldn't consent. I couldn't refuse. Your husband found me helpless and he raped me. Those children you killed, they were born of violence. Does that make you feel better? Does it change anything?" The queen stared down at her, and for the first time, doubt crossed her face. She turned to Stefan. "Is this true?" Stefan couldn't speak. His silence was answer enough. The queen's face twisted. "Light the fire," she screamed. The executioner approached with his torch. But before he could light the wood, Stefan found his voice. "Stop." It was a king's command. The executioner froze. Stefan descended from the balcony. He crossed the courtyard and stood before Talia, tears streaming down his face. "She's right," he said. "I did find her sleeping. I did take advantage of her helplessness. I am guilty of everything she accuses me of. And our children," he turned to face the queen, "are not dead. I know they're not. I know you couldn't have done it. You're cruel, wife, but you're not a monster." "Liar," the queen spat. "I watched the cook butcher them." "Then bring the cook here," Stefan said. "Let him testify." The cook was brought forward, trembling. He knew this was the moment. He could lie, protect himself, let Talia burn. Or he could speak truth. "My king," he said, "I couldn't kill children. I substituted goats. The children live. They're hidden in my home, safe." The queen let out a shriek of pure rage. She lunged at the cook, but guards held her back. She fought them, screaming incoherently, all composure shattered. Stefan turned to his guards. "Free her," he said, gesturing to Talia. Then he pointed to his wife. "And arrest her. For attempted murder of innocence. For conspiracy. For everything." The queen was dragged away, still screaming threats and curses. Talia was freed from the stake. She collapsed and Stefan caught her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. For all of it." Talia looked at him. Her children were alive. That was all that mattered. The rest, the violation, the trauma, the horror, she would deal with that later. For now, her children lived. "Take me to them," she said. The children were retrieved from the cook's home. Talia held them close, breathing in their scent, unable to believe they were real, alive, safe. The cook was rewarded with gold and titles. The queen was put on trial. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The attempted murder of children, the deception, the cruelty. The sentence was death by fire, the same death she had planned for Talia. The old story says this was justice, that the queen deserved it. But was it? The queen had been betrayed by her husband. She had discovered his infidelity, his illegitimate children, his plans to replace her. Her rage was understandable even if her actions were not. But fairy tales don't deal in moral complexity. They deal in punishment and reward. So the queen burned in the courtyard where Talia was supposed to burn. Stefan watched, gray-faced. Talia refused to attend. She stayed in her chambers with her children and tried not to think about the smell of smoke. After the queen's death, Stefan married Talia. He made her queen, legitimized sun and moon, declared them his heirs. It should have been a happy ending. But Talia never forgot. Never forgot waking up to find herself violated and pregnant. Never forgot believing her children were dead and eaten. Never forgot the stake and the wood and how close she had come to burning. She was queen, yes. She was wealthy, protected, respected. But she never truly trusted Stefan. How could she? Their entire relationship was built on violence. She performed her duties, raised her children, ruled at his side. But at night, She dreamed of sleeping and waking to find horrors. She dreamed of fire. She dreamed of her children screaming. Stefan tried to make amends. He was devoted, apologetic, endlessly guilty. But some things can't be fixed. Some violations are permanent. He had taken her agency, her consent, her innocence. He had changed her entire life while she slept. Helpless. No amount of crowns or jewels or declarations of love could undo that. They lived together for many years. They had more children, legitimate from the start. They ruled justly, or as justly as any monarchs of that era. And when they died, years apart, the official histories recorded them as a love story. The sleeping beauty who was awakened by a king. The faithful love that overcame all obstacles. Fairy tale ending. But the old women who told this story knew better. They knew it wasn't a love story. It was a survival story. It was a story about what women endure, about violations that society tries to romanticize, about trauma that gets rewritten as destiny. The brothers Grimm, when they collected this tale, were horrified. They rewrote it completely. They removed the rape, the pregnancy, the cannibalism, the burning. They replaced it all with a simple kiss, a beautiful awakening, a pure romance. They thought they were improving the story, making it suitable for children. But they removed the truth. They removed the warning. The original story said, "This is what men can do to helpless women. This is how society protects powerful men and punishes wives for their husbands' crimes. This is how we survive violations by pretending they were love stories." The sanitized version says, "Wait patiently, be beautiful, be passive, and someday your prince will come." It teaches girls that unconsciousness is romantic, that consent doesn't matter, that everything will work out if you're pretty enough and patient enough. Which story serves women better? The comfortable lie or the uncomfortable truth? I don't know. But I know the old story survived for centuries because it had something important to say. It warned young women about the dangers of helplessness, about men who would take advantage, about the cost of waiting passively for rescue. It wasn't a pretty story. It wasn't a comfortable story. But it was a true story, true in the way myths and fairy tales are true. True to human nature. True to the darkness that lives in the hearts of ordinary people. True to the compromises women had to make to survive in a world where they had so little power. So sleep now if you dare. But know that sleep is dangerous. Know that helplessness is dangerous. Know that the world is full of people who will take advantage of those who cannot defend themselves. And know that sometimes the monster isn't a dragon or a witch. Sometimes the monster is a king, respected and powerful. Sometimes the monster looks like a hero. Sometimes the monster is the person who's supposed to save you. Dream of spinning wheels if you must. Dream of enchantments and 100-year sleeps. But when you wake, remember Talia. Remember that she survived not because of love's true kiss, but because of her own strength. Remember that she endured not a romance but a violation. Remember that her happy ending wasn't happy at all, just the best she could manage given the circumstances. The story isn't over. It never is. Because somewhere tonight, someone is sleeping helplessly. Someone is being violated. Someone is waking to find their life changed beyond recognition by something done to them without their consent or knowledge. The story continues. It always continues. And the spinning wheels keep turning, and the curses keep being spoken, and girls keep falling into enchanted sleeps. And we keep telling them it's all for the best, that it's romantic, that they should be grateful for whatever rescue comes, even if the rescue looks a lot like assault. Sleep well if you can. Dream of kisses and princes and happy endings. But remember, when you wake, that the real story is darker than the one you were told. And the real world is darker still. The spinning wheel waits. The curse is already spoken. And somewhere, a girl is falling asleep, and she doesn't know yet what will happen to her while she dreams. May your sleep be safe. May your dreams be your own. And may you wake to find yourself unchanged, unviolated, still in control of your own story. Because that, more than any prince or kiss or crown, is the real happy ending. The one they don't tell you about in fairy tales. The one you have to fight for yourself. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.